Hi everyone, it's Monica and welcome back to Tailor Made Cards for You. Well, if you follow me on Instagram, you've seen recently that I've been a little obsessed with cabinet cards. And if you're not familiar with cabinet cards, these are the old photographs that used to be taken in some of the shops back in the early, probably, I don't know, 30s or 20s. I'm not really sure exactly when. But they're really cool. They're cardboard and they're really heavy. And they have some great images of some of our friends from a while back. And what I really love is that the studio used to also label their cabinet cards as well. Well, I wanted to create some Valentine's Day cards, and this is kind of where I got my inspiration. So I wanted to share with you a couple of things that I've been working on, and then we're going to create a Valentine's Day card, and then we're also going to create a cabinet card. So this is kind of what started the whole thing. I had some of these old cards here from Tim Holtz, his Ideology collection, and I created a card. If you can remember on the last video, I shared with you how I did the inside of this card. So I needed to create a cover, and this is kind of what I came up with. And I wanted to decorate the outside, but I really didn't have a lot of stamps that worked in combination, or worked as one set, I should say. So I found a couple different stamps that I just used to decorate the outside. And then I used some of the wallpaper paper from Tim Holtz to frame the inside of it, kind of like a mat. And this is what I came up with, and it came out pretty good. I was pretty pleased with it. It's a nice heavy cardstock, so it'll make a nice card for somebody. But then I started playing a little bit more, and I got out my my embossing glaze, and I created this background, and I was really happy with this. Again, I used the wallpaper for my framing, and I embossed it and just kind of grunged it up a little bit, and I was happy with this overall. And I thought this, again, would make a nice card. But then I had these smaller cards here, and they didn't quite fit into the card size, but I wanted to be able to come up with something that I can use in my junk journals. And this is kind of what I came up with. Now currently there's no stamps on the market where you can create the back of the cabinet cards. So I created this in Photoshop, and then I went ahead and I distressed the front, and then I used some of my remnant rubs from Field Notes collection. And I think the stamps would work as well. I think on my next few I'm going to use some stamps to see if those would work as well, because not everybody has remnant rubs. And the thing with remnant rubs is, once you use them, then they're gone. But if you have the stamp set, then you can create them over and over again. So that's what I want to go ahead and do. I want to go ahead and recreate this for you to show you how I did this, because I think this would make a great Valentine's Day card. And then I want to show you how to create your own cabinet cards. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, so the first thing I did is I got out my heavy cardstock, and this is the distressed mixed media cardstock. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to emboss this. But before I do that, I want to make sure I get some nice images for my embossing. So I'm going to use my tool here to go ahead and make sure that I don't have any of the excess flakes from my embossing glaze go where I don't want them to go. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of add that all over my cardstock. And then I'm going to get my stamp, and this is one of the Tim Holtz stamp. It's one of the background stamps, so it's nice size. And we're going to go ahead and line this up so we can stamp the entire background of it. So just using the grid lines on my Misty to line it up. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and use my embossing stamp pad from scrapbook.com, but any embossing stamp pad is going to work for this, of course. You could even use ink if you wanted to, that didn't dry very quickly. You want to make sure that it does stay wet for a bit, so that way your embossing powder or your embossing glaze will adhere, to the wet images. All right, so I went ahead and put a nice amount on my stamp, and now we're going to go ahead and stamp it. And I'm going to just do a really nice pressure here. I don't want to stamp it twice because it is an oversized stamp. I don't have anything holding it in place. And I don't want to take the chance of not getting the perfect stamped image a second time. So I'm putting some nice pressure on this. And then once I'm finished, you'll be able to see, maybe not on camera, but you'll be able to see the nice embossed ink on your cardstock. All right, so once I have that stamped, I'm going to go ahead and grab a piece of scratch paper because I don't want my embossing glaze to go all over the place. And let's see here, you don't need to see all my scribbles. I'm going to go ahead and put this generously on my cardstock. And as you can see, the reason for the extra piece of paper is so it will catch the excess. Now let's go ahead and just put it right back in there. And if you used your tool here, you shouldn't have too much of that embossing glaze stick to your cardstock where you don't want it to go. Hopefully it's doing its job. Okay, and then if you have any extra, go ahead and just put it right back into your container. All right, so now that we have our embossing glaze on our paper, we're going to go ahead and heat it up. All right, and once you have it embossed, you'll be able to see that it's shiny now and it's not all dusty flakes. Give it a minute. You don't want to touch this because it is going to be a little bit hot. But just give it a minute to dry and then we'll be ready to color it up. Now the colors that I used to create my background are Distress Oxide. I used tea dye, and then I used Distress Ink, Vintage Photo, and Walnut Stain. Now you could use your oxides as well, but I like that these are a little bit darker, and these are more for the outside, and that's why I liked for the outside or the framing to be darker using the Distress Inks versus the oxide. But before I do that, I want to go ahead and cut my circle. Now, as you can see here, I have two ovals here. I have the larger one is on your roses, and then the smaller one is on your wallpaper. Okay, so I went ahead and cut out a couple of ovals here, and these are just nesting ovals, your rectangular ones. And as you can see, for the roses, I used the larger one. And then for the matting, I used the smaller one. So that way it'll fit right nicely right there. But I don't want to add this yet. I want to go ahead and distress this up a bit. So let's go ahead and do that. So I wanted it to be a little bit lighter on the inside. So that's where I came in with the tea dye. And I used my brush versus my blending tool, because again, I just wanted to add some color without it taking over. And you may be wondering why I have this black piece of paper here, and that's to avoid that glare here, because I am taping later in the afternoon, so I didn't want us to have that glare on my mat. So there's no rhyme or reason to this. I'm just adding some color. And tea dye is subtle enough that I can just go ahead and use my brush to add some of that color. Okay, so now that we have some color, now we're going to come in with our blending tool. And I want to start with Vintage Photo. All right, and Just starting from the outside. Just doing some rubbing motion here, just circular. Doesn't take a lot of pressure. You just want to get some of that color onto your cardstock. And it doesn't, you don't want it perfect because you want some of that tea dye to come through as well. Okay, so now that I'm finished with that, I'm going to move right into my walnut stain. And you notice I'm not changing my brush as long as it's in the same color family. And we're going brown here, and it's the same type of ink. So these are the distress inks, not the oxides. It doesn't really contaminate it because it will come off easily. If you are concerned about that, just grab a paper towel and wipe off the excess. But I don't necessarily do that because I know that the ink will be fine. So I just go right into my walnut stain using my same blending tool. And I'm just adding some of that dark ink to the edges just to age it up a bit. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the inside. And you can put as little or as much as you want on it. I just kind of go by the way I like it to look. And once I have that final look, then I stop. And I think that looks pretty good. And then the final thing that I do, and I'm not sure why I do it, but I always like to come back with my tea dye just to do a final brush through. And this not only finishes up the color, but it will blend in any ink that might be a remnant as well. At least that's what I think. All right, so here we go. So now we can go ahead and attach this. I'm going to cover up my sun coming in. All right. And before I attach it, I do want to go ahead and get a paper towel and just go over the roses. Because you did use glaze, your roses should pop up and the color should be pretty vibrant. So I'm just kind of taking the ink off of the actual flowers. All right. And then I will just take my 3-in-1 beacon glue and just add it around the edge. Okay. And then I start from the back and then I just adjust it. Looks pretty good. I'll give that a minute to dry. And then while that's drying, let's go ahead and round the corners. I just like the way that finished corner looks. This isn't really a step that I do typically on my cards, but I like the way that it looked on these. All right. Now we're ready for our image. And I am going to go ahead and use this one here. So just figure out exactly how it's going to go. You may have to cut it a little bit, but it's not a problem. And then once you figure out the image you want to use, again, just turn it over, add your glue, and then you can add your photo. And then just trim it after the fact. Now what's nice about this design is you can use your own photos. You don't necessarily have to use a craft photo. So if you want to create a Valentine and add your own image, you could certainly do that as well. because my glue is wet, I'm just making some adjustments here. And then this will be ready to trim down and add to a card. Now, another thing you could do is you could add a sentiment, like I did on this one here. I added roses, and these are actually in my shop. I created these last year. And let's see here. I think I'll do love notes. Oh, I could do forever as well. What do you think? I think I'll do forever. All right, so if you want to, this is just printed on paper, but if you want to have it a little bit thicker, then all you need to do is get some chipboard or cardboard and glue it on that to make it a little bit thicker. So I'm going to go ahead and do that before I add it. So I'm just taking my glue again, and I will add it to my cardboard. Give it a minute to dry, and then you're going to cut it. Okay. Alright, and then once you have it trimmed up, again, just take your blending tool and distress up the edges. You don't have to do this, but I just like the way that it looks. Okay, and then this can go right here, and then we'll be ready to go on a card. Now, if you want to add more to this, so for instance here on this particular one, I did a remnant rub and I put June 29th, 1932. You can definitely do that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I think I'll just, let's see here, not sure what I'll do. I don't necessarily have another date, but maybe I'll just put this book number 710. And like I said, if you have the Field Notes stamp set, you could use the stamps from that set as well. This is just a little added embellishment. And ordinarily I would use my stylist, but I don't know where it's at. So I'm having to improvise here. It should be in my top drawer, but it's not. So whenever I can't find some of my tools, that means typically it's time to clean my craft room. All right, so I see it's starting to come off a little bit. Okay, so I went ahead and added the book number 710, and then I added some numbers here. And then it'll be ready to add to a card. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this cabinet card. Now, I created this background in Photoshop just because, again, there aren't any stamps out there to create backings for cabinet cards. And then I went ahead and I colored it up and I added my photo. So I want to show you how I did that. All right, so the first thing that I did is, of course, I printed out my cabinet card back. And as you can see, I left edging on the left and the right, and then also on the bottom, because you're going to want to score this so you can attach your back. So just line it up, find the line of the cabinet card, and then just score it all the way down. And then once you get it scored down, fold it over and, give it a good fold. Go ahead and use your bone folder tool to go ahead and varnish it so that way it's, nice and crisp. Now, just like you would do when you're covering journals or you have excess paper on your corners, go ahead and get your scissors and trim it down and do it exactly like I'm doing here. And this is so when you fold it over, you don't have that excess paper on the bottom. You're going to have your left side and your bottom touch, so you don't want to have that excess on the corner. And doing that little trim just kind of helps it. And then once you get your score lines folded and, scored really nicely, then you're going to go ahead and glue the left side onto some white paper. Now, don't glue the whole thing down because remember, we still have to cut that oval. So just glue the left side so that way it will open up. Now, you might be wondering why we don't just cut the oval first, and I guess you could do that. But I find by having it attached to the back, it really helps you line it up a little bit better. And then that way you can ensure that your oval is directly in the center. So that's just how I did it. If you feel like you can cut the oval first and line it up, then by all means, go ahead and do that first. But this is just the way that I approached it. And then once you have it glued, you can go ahead and cut the excess white just along the right-hand side using, the top of your card as your guide. And then at that point, once you have it cut, go ahead and go over to your die cutting machine, pick out the oval that will work. I end up using the oval that was second to the smallest. So not the smallest one, but the second to the smallest. But find one that fits so that way you still have some room on the bottom and, of course, on the edges. And that it looks, symmetrical. So that way it looks good. Okay, so I went ahead and I cut out my oval, as you can see here. And now I'm going to go ahead and color it up using my distress inks and my oxides. Now this process is going to be exactly the same like I did the rose card. I'm going to start with my tea dye, and then I'm going to work my way in with my vintage photo and my walnut stain. And then once you have it all colored up, then you can go ahead and decorate it or not, however you decide to go, using some of your remnant rubs and your stamps. Now, the stamps that I was using was from the Field Notes, just because they have some great numbers. But certainly, dig through your stamp collection and see what will work for you. So that's pretty much it, you guys. Hopefully I've given you some ideas not only for a Valentine's Day card, but also how to create your own cabinet cards. And as a treat, I will go ahead and leave you a link to the image for the cabinet cards so you can try these on your own as well. And I will leave your coupon code for your free item below in the description. So as always, I'll leave a list of everything that I've used along with the links to the stores. And if you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up. And as always, I will have extra photos at the end of the video, so stick around for those as well. And then finally, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button before you head out. All right, everybody, thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you again next time.